Anyone else on Garvey's principle of nationhood? Okay, if not, we can go ahead and reveal the answer. And Brother John covered some of it, essentially that Black people must seek salvation first as a race. And that, again, Black people should be brought into an active community, encompassing the whole Black universe, so they can rely on the force of an overwhelming majority, even in places where Black people were not the majority, where they were I don't really like the word minority, but anyway, where they were not the majority.
Yes.
Okay, so question number 2 says, what is the language of the UNIA according to Marcus Garvey? What is the language of the UNIA?
It's a good question.
Anyone?
Race pride, nationalism, self-reliance.
Okay.
Language of the day. That's a good.
Anyone else?
African nationalism.
Nationalism?
Yeah, African nationalism.
African nationalism, yes.
Okay. All right. Those are all true. Those are all true. And these questions this week are kind of leaning more on the book, but they're all true. And
I think I see it here. Language of building a government, of building political power and all that goes with it.
yes. Yes. Absolutely. Anyone else? So we can go ahead and reveal the answer. Chapter 2. Question 2, my bad.
Oh.
I'm jumping from questions to chapters. Oh, okay. So, so Garvey, yes.
No, you go ahead.
So Garvey, if you can read it, Brother John, if you want to.
Garvey declared the UNIA did not speak in the language of theology and religion, nor in the language of social reform, but the Universal Negro Improvement Association speaks in the language of building a government, of building political power, and all that goes with it.
Yes, indeed.
Very good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And okay, so if no one else has anything to add, we can go to the next question. And this one says, in Garvey's words, what was the greatest legislative assembly ever brought together by the Negro people of the world? And what are some of the things that resulted from the event?
It's a great question.
Anyone?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it.
Yes, please do so.
Yeah, I would say the 1921st International Convention of the Negro People of the World, hosted by the UNIA. And
that is true.
Some of the things that came out of it, naturally, most probably importantly, was the birth of the red, black, and green flag. Not actually the birth of it, but the ratification, I should say, because it was actually introduced to the UNIA in 1918 and adopted. But the actual international plebiscite that we hosted ratified it in 1920, as well as the accompanying Universal Ethiopian Anthem, which is the real not only Black national anthem, but Black nationalist anthem. Whereas that lift every voice and sing is nothing but a hymn that was originally dedicated to Abraham Lincoln. It was an ode to Abraham, races behind, and has nothing really to do with African people fighting for African redemption. It has to do with Black people showing that patriotism for white America. So it's not really something that would fit the red, black, and green flag anyway. So I'm glad that the Honorable Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford and Benjamin Burrell came together and put the Universal Ethiopian Anthem together to go along with the flag. But also, I would say, thirdly, one of the declarations that has been recognized lately by the UN is the International Day for the Race, which is August 31st. And that was a big unifying factor. In fact, some places like Costa Rica been celebrating it every year for the last 100+ years since we introduced it. Negro Day they have every year. And we all around the globe should be unified because, solidarity when we celebrate our race in that way, in that time and place. So anyway, it did a lot to unify the African world like nothing ever before or since.
Awesome. That was excellent answer. And thanks for the added tidbits. Very interesting. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't know if there's much I got to add.
Okay. So if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at the
kind of knocked that one out the park.
now I have these little thing that on my okay, never mind. It's not okay, so the International Convention that began in 1920. So that was one of the greatest legislative assembly, according to Garvey. Also, as Brother Mariama mentioned, the adoption of the Ethiopian anthem as the anthem of the Negro race was done at that convention. Also, the organization, I shouldn't have been an apostrophe there, had its own Magna Carta in the Declaration of Rights of the Negro people of the world. And also at that event, Garvey was bestowed the title of Honorable at the convention. And there were some other things that occurred as well. But those were some of the main things. Okay. And if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at question 4, which says, who were the uniforms and the robes that Garvey insisted on wearing on ceremonial occasions fashioned after?
Should this be WORE?
Yes.
Who wore? So who?
No, it were.
Who were?
See, it's saying who. In other words, who were the people, the uniform and robes that Garvey insisted on wearing, fashioned after? Like who were?
Oh, gotcha.
What kind of people was he mimicking in the wearing of those kind of uniforms?
I understand.
Okay.
Read the whole question.
Anyone?
You said who were the people fashioned after is the question?
Who in other words, like for example, was he trying to mimic the government? Was he trying to mimic the military? Like
Right. Yeah. That's why I thought you were going there, but okay. Yeah, well at some of the ceremonies like the royal court reception, he had knighted certain people of
Yeah.
different regions of Africa. So there were
Yeah.
some senior diplomats who were given titles such as the Knight Commander Order of the Nile, as Mr. Garvey was. No, actually, Mr. Garvey was the Distinguished Service Order of Ethiopia. And then,
Mm-hmm.
some of the ladies had, royal distinctions like Henrietta Davis and others. Were also, Lady Commander Order of the Nile. But there was also distinguished people in uniform, like the potentate and the Supreme Commissioner and the Deputy Potentate, to signify by certain, insignias on their uniform and, the feathers in their cap. And by the way, those were ostrich feathers, which is symbolized as Mayat
Mm.
for the record. But it was also, a lot of people with, the uniform ranks were not military. And, I make sure I'm cautious in clarifying, as we always would say, not that they weren't prepared for military duty, but they were
Right.
considered uniform ranks and not paramilitary, as some people try to characterize them, because it was more of an emergency dispatch unit. It was meant not to invade and occupy a land, but to it was prepared to if it needed to, but it was more designed to protect. Like if we have a disaster and we want to set up social services like Black Cross, etc., then we'd have
Mm-hmm.
a security wing that could provide security for that emergency situation and help excavate, get evacuate people from a disaster region, etc. So it had a function, but it wasn't really designed to intimidate others. But anyway, yeah, some of us who had different ranks within the U.S. military and other countries, kept the uniforms and the rankings that we had in those militaries and utilized them for protection of our race. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we
Yeah.
had a lot of glorious uniforms, and the Girl Guides had their uniforms. The younger ladies who were
Mm-hmm.
eventually groomed as a Black Cross or Motor Corps, etc., as well as in different industries. And the Boy Scouts, had their uniforms. I think the 1931 photo of East Brooklyn Division Number 64 probably best represents the images of that. Matter of fact, see if I can send a link in the group. But it has a nice round image of what a local division that was fully uniformed and active would look like for their auxiliaries. But yeah, this was a glorious time in our association's past.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. They had to send Garvey away, man. It was just amazing. They were just too scared. But anyway, there wasn't any reason for them to be scared. We were just, you know, but that's the stories for other days. So, okay, if no one else has anything to add, we can go ahead and take a look at the answers, um, many of which Brother Maria Ma touched on.
Yeah, leaders of sovereign states. Okay.
Okay, so we see that the uniforms were fashioned after those worn by leaders of sovereign states. Okay. Okay.
I got a question.
Okay.
Um, it came to my attention recently. When people speak of, and Brother Mario Mouse spoke of the image of when Garvey had the ostrich hat, but that uniform, in particular, or at least that style, I've been told was a tribute to Toussaint Louverture, and that was the inspiration for that style. Has there been any documentation of that connection?
No,
Um,
no. Oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. I was gonna say he was here. Tucson was one of zero, but please go ahead, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's never been any. At least in the last 25 years, I never read anything that actually directly attributed the uniform to Tucson. But what happened when we went to war in the U.S., the Black soldiers who went to war, they weren't given uniforms by the U.S. government. particularly when they went to war in Flanders and different places throughout France to liberate them from the Germans. So the French army wound up giving us uniforms, and so when we came back and parade and did different marches, we looked like the French Legion. And because Mr. Garvey had respect for Toussaint Louverture, and we already looked like the French Legion, he kind of went with it. He had respect for Napoleon as well. So those uniforms, eventually just became what we wore. But I don't think it was a deliberate, but it may not have been, not that he didn't have that in mind, when he got it fashioned for him to wear. So yeah, but it's just never been anything that concretely said that that was his motivation.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly he definitely talked about Toussaint and African fundamentalism, the official creed, and we had to learn about him in the catechism and that kind of thing. The UNIA's official teaching tool. So anyway, yeah, Toussaint is definitely a giant amongst others.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you.
yes. Thank you so much. And if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at question number 5. And it asks, what are some other external attributes of the UNIA that showed evidence of nationhood?
Yeah, I guess I can jump up there. They can.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Brother Moriamal answered that with the
Yes, he
what we
touched on it, some of it. He
20.
did. So,
So the flag, I think that's one of the biggest things. Mr. Garvey says we should understand that a flag is a symbol of a nation. A Declaration of Rights. We could talk about the plebiscite, the anthem, um, International Day of Celebration on the 31st. Those would be a couple things that I would argue.
okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add some of the different departments. We had the Royal Corps Engineers. We had like the Black Eagle Flying Corps or Aeronautic Division of the UNIA, where not only did Mr. Garvey marshal the ships in the Black Star Line like a Navy, but he also had some airplanes that we were, organizing and putting together with some of the pilots we had. So it was a lot of industrial development and preparation scene for us to establish the settlement in Liberia. A lot of the training we had, because soldiers are not only trained to take a country apart and tear it down, but they also trained to build it back up. So
Yes,
some
sir.
of these soldiers that we were sending or looking to send to Liberia, along with the engineers and all these other pharmacists, farmers, etc., were part of that nation state formation that we were putting together, and unfortunately was undermined. But yeah, those implements can be seen in virtually everything that UNIA did. It was that's like reason I got into history in the first place in the UNIA, just for the record, is I was at an international convention in Philly, and there was an elder commemoration um, committee. There was a standing committee of the convention that they asked for a report from it, and nobody could give a report because 4 to 5 people on the committee died from old age. So they say, anybody else want to step up and get on the committee? I'm like, okay. And first thing I did is say, well, we are a government, we are a nation, then we shouldn't have no elder commemoration. We should have a recognition of honor. So I put together, this whole program, recognition of honor, and designed some medals, paid for them out of pocket to honor some of the elders, one of whom just passed, Honorable Queen Mother Thelma Myers.
Yeah.
Put some different medals together, and we put citations on how to honor those who've been in the executive council so many years, etc. But that's when you start thinking like a nation government, your mindset is changes a little bit. Now, I don't try to pretend we're a sovereign government like some people have and take it to the extreme. Because we're not sovereign, we don't have a sovereign land base. So I'm not trying to
Right.
some sovereign nation's land and pretend I can just pick a government out of their land, without getting thrown in jail.
Right.
But yeah, we are definitely still, as long as Africa isn't really free of colonialism, neo-colonialism, and other things, we still have interests
We still
of
have work to do,
a nationalistic
definitely.
mentality.
Have a lot of work to do. Yes. If Africa is not free, we're not free. Plain and simple. But a lot of us don't look at it that way. We get complacent and satisfied with, less than. But anyway, if no one else has anything else to add, we can take a look at some of the answers.
Yep.
And some of. Did you want to add something else, Brother John?
No, I was just making sure I show the answer.
Okay. So, the uniform auxiliaries of the UNIA, such as the Universal African Legions, the Universal Motor Corps, the Universal African Black Cross Nurses, juvenile divisions, and so on. And Brother Mariam touched on a few of those as well. And if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at question number 6. And it says, according to Tony Martin, what was the most enduring of the UNIA's external trappings of nationhood? How did it come about? And what are some of the events surrounding it? Anyone? We kind of touched on it a little bit.
Yeah. What I'm seeing. Red, black, and green flag from the 1920 Declaration of Rights of Negro Peoples of the World.
Okay. That is true. That is true. Anyone else? Okay. So if no one else has anything to add, we could take a look at the answers. I'll be on the next page. Okay, there. Okay. So it's the flag, and it's the flag of the red, black, and green, and it was adopted in 1920, and at the Declaration of Rights as the official color of the African race. And there were some different events surrounding the flag, like they came up with the song, Every Race Has a Flag, but the coon. So basically in the US, there was a lack of symbol of nationhood, and it became a source of ridicule on the part of whites. And so after this fist fight between an Irishman and an Afro American, the Bishop J. Lennox parted the fight, and then he saw the need, for a flag, and basically he created the flag. And so the first flag was based on biblical symbols, and it was not really as successful. And one of the other thing about the flag is that it was not only confined after it became developed and recognized worldwide. It was not only confined to Afro-Americans, but it inspired nationalist struggle on the African continent as well. So one of the things that got me when I was looking at this is how a people could be taken from their nations or from their nation where they have their own representation of nationhood and brought into foreign land and wasn't treated as part of the citizens of the country. And then on top of knowing this, they would make fun that they didn't have a flag or a representation. So that was kind of weird, I thought, but that was just things that ran through my head while I was looking at it. Anyone else have any questions, comments, concern about the flag?
Just
That's a good point, by the way.
most enduring UNIA and external trappings of nationhood, according to Dr. Tony Martin.
That was question 6, and I think that's on page 43. And question 7 says, who was able to translate the flag into the more meaningful and today's universally adopted red, black, and green, and what does it mean?
Did Dr. Martin use that word translate the flag?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, did Dr. Tony Martin use that word translate the flag?
I believe that's the word. I believe that's the word that that the book used. I think that's on page
On page
I think
40,
it's on page 44.
I've got Garveyites used the race catechism Garveyites used explain the significance of the red, black, and green as so forth.
Yes.
Yeah, when they say he translated somebody else's flag as if he borrowed his idea from some other person who
I
attempted
know
to.
it seems,
Oh,
but
no, here it is.
what happened initially was the first flag was a hodgepodge of colors and
Yes.
purple and blue, and it was like
Like a Skittles flag.
throwing the United States definitions in there, which really was not what it's all about. So from that first one that the bishop kind of came up with, Garvey made it more our flag and add more meaning significant to the black race to the flag. And so, the red represents something, and the black represents something, and the green represents something. And it just seems a lot more fitting. There is a page where they talk about what the first flag was about, and it was just kind of convoluted and all over the place. And this one was more fitting to me.
But the way it sounds, unlike the way it really was that, and people have this conversation all the time because it was a Zhang Empire or whatever how you pronounce it, in
Mhm.
in North Africa that had a red, black, and green flag some thousands of years ago, and people seem to want to connect that Mr. Garvey got his idea from that flag, and people
Oh,
claim things. He never said where he got the flag colors and idea
okay.
from. Came to him, so I didn't want it to seem like some bishop, whoever, happened to get a flag, and Garvey said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna take his flag and I'm gonna improve on it and perfect it," because there's nothing that says anywhere that at least I've read the point that Mr. Garvey took a flag model or anything from somebody and added to it. It's only
Right.
he came up with the red, black, and green. And again, this is
Mhm.
1918 that he actually introduced it to the UNIA. And in fact, tonight I actually wanted to talk a little about that in closing about the flag, because we're close to the anniversary of the four little girls who weren't really little girls. Actually, they were young adolescents. They were like 14 years old, close to being young women, who got blown up in the church in the South back it's about 60 years ago.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
there's a part of the Universal Ethiopian anthem that talks about a young lady who was molested and murdered, and why we should fight for her dignity, etc. But it's a part of the anthem that most people don't sing and not familiar with. But it's based upon the writer's familiarity with Marcus Garvey's red, black, and green flag, and when he
Mhm.
knew, saw her black body on the green grass with the red blood flowing, after they had, mutilated her, then it inspired him to write that verse of the Universal Ethiopian anthem to go along with the red, black, green flag. But
Mhm.
anyway, said all that to say that we have a unique history that doesn't really connect with other folks' history as much as folks want to make it seem like Garvey sat at the foot of Dewey
Exactly.
and Garvey did this. Hey, he didn't sit at nobody's feet like that. I mean, he learned from some different people. He had respect for others, but he wasn't kind of co-opting a program from somebody else. He had to really
Right.
his strategy from all the best that he had known to be, and put this universal umbrella together where every member of the race could come together and work as one. But yeah, it wasn't
Mhm.
borrowing nobody else's flag. If that's the impression that was is Tony was trying to give or somehow is given, then that would be an incorrect assumption there. But anyway, that's all I wanted to point out. That I
Yes.
wouldn't really translate personally. I would say Mr. Garvey came up
Yes.
with his own.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we could, remove that. I think I took that right from the book, actually, but that's the author's spin. That's the author's spin. But yeah, I don't totally, that makes a lot of sense. That does make a lot of sense. So if no one else has anything to add, we can take a look at, well, the answer. Does anyone know what the red stands for?
Well, yeah. Briefly, I mean, it is on page 44, and the author does use the term translate. It
Mm-hmm.
says it's at the bottom, the last part of the paragraph at the top of page 44. The flag itself, I guess he's talking about the previous flag, was apparently not a great success, but the idea lived on with Garvey, who was able to translate it into the more meaningful parentheses and today universally adopted red, black, and green. So the author did use that term translate.
Yes. Yes. So anyone care to say what the colors represent? The red, the black, and the green.
So the red represents the blood of Africa.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's awesome. Anyone else want to say what the black represents?
The people.
African people.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And how about the green?
Text says motherland.
Okay.
Motherland for
Yes.
youth and new
Awesome.
ideas. That's what we always say.
Awesome, guys.
I would say like the resources of Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all right. Those are all correct. Yes, absolutely. If no one has anything else to add, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, I would just
So,
say, I would just say quickly that other people have kind of used and perverted might be a strong word, but I know there was a rap group that used to celebrate the red, the black, and the green as if we were talking about marijuana or something. And then they got the one time white reporter who was getting on Mr. Garvey's nerve with his racist question, asked Mr. Garvey where the red, black, and green came from, and sarcastically he said, "Well, the green represents the Irish Republican Army, and the red is from Soviet Russia." And the guy actually wrote that down like it was really what the red, black, and green stood for,
yeah,
and put it in his book. Yeah, and then
ignorant.
other people take that comment and then they make it seem like that's what really was the inspiration behind it, which obviously wasn't. But but things like that do exist. So stand by what the catechism says whenever people ask what does it stand for and where it came from. If he didn't say it, then don't assume it.
And the book also says that in some instances, McGarvey would use it to represent certain things that was fitting, but for the most part, the it's what we're looking at, it was for the black race. It was the blood, shed for for our redemption and liberty. And of course, black for the noble and distinguished race to which we belong, and green for the luxuriant vegetation of our motherland. So
And
absolutely.
I want to add also in that order, by the way, because
Yeah.
there are different entities who thought they could take our flag and bastardize it and rearrange the orders because it wasn't pretty enough for them. And so they can just undo what our ancestors did at that international convention, 25,000 deep. And the hell with all they voted on and ratified. They just going to do it their way. And,
Right.
and they come up with the silliest reasons. I won't even mention the name of one group, but they had nerve to talk about, well, we putting black people first, so we putting black at the top. I said, what do you think, Mr. Garvey put red people first? I mean, it's only
I
about black
know.
people. It's just a stupid,
I know, it's so
argument.
silly.
But yeah, folks did it, and then Maulana Karenga did it with Kwanzaa initially, but it didn't catch on, so people kept it red, black, and green, even though he tried to twist it. But anyway, it's a lot of history to that flag. What we've done to try to maintain its dignity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It wasn't just a one overnight thing. It actually evolved to to the red, black, and green, So that's amazing. And if no one else has anything to add, we can go to the next question. And that one says, what did the Declaration of Rights of the Negro People of the World called for? Anyone? Any more? Any? We may have touched on some of this one already too.
I think I
called for not actually, but the right to possess Africa. Those who were torn away from it. But yeah, it was a lot of rights. For our children to learn history. Black children learn black history through their or Negro history through their benefit. But yeah, there was a lot of calls. We were free denizens, et cetera, wherever we may be, and entitled to certain human rights. which of
Yes.
course came long before the UN Declaration of Human Rights. We were thinking long ahead of these great founding fathers of these universal documents. As the League of Nations, United Nations, so they were so forward thinking, but they following the UNIA pattern. But anyway, yeah, that's amongst a few things they called for.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, just reviewing through the text, page 45, it says called upon the various governments of the world to accept and acknowledge Negro representatives who shall be sent to the said governments to represent the general welfare of the Negro peoples of the world. So a general call for self-governance of Negroes globally, and that the UNIA would take responsibility to organize that effort.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And so if no one has anything else to add, we can take a look at those answers, some of which Brother John just touched on. So it says one of the more important consequences of Garvey's doctrine of nationhood was the establishment of representative of the race in strategic areas. So this Declaration of Rights of the Negro people of the world called upon various governments of the world to accept and acknowledge Negro representatives who shall be sent to the said governments to represent the general welfare of the Negro people of the world. And so one of the things that happened in 1919, that even before this, was the UNIA had sent commission to France, to the Paris Peace Conference, but they did not succeed in obtaining an abatement of the zeal of which the imperialist power was trying to seize the ex-German African colonies. And so eventually they just wrote off the League of Nations as null and void as far as African Negroes are concerned, because they are seeking to deprive Negroes of their liberty. So that's kind of started out there. And yeah, so it was the start of representation for Black people. And it started here, which is where it's supposed to start, but we still have African countries that don't even have any seats. It's like still null and void as far as many countries on the African continent is concerned. So anyone has anything else to add?
Yeah, well, just briefly in regards to the Declaration of Rights of Negro Peoples in the World, something that I just saw as you were talking, as I was working on the file. I don't know if anybody caught it. Okay, crap. See, don't do that. One of the declarations of Negro Peoples of the World, 1920, was in regards to the term Negro, and we can see the benefits of that today. This is prior to computers and all that stuff, but even today, if we leave this word as it is, something's wrong with it, and the computer knows that something's wrong with it, because this word is supposed to be capitalized, and that's not anything to. That's a good example, but just the small benefits that we may not appreciate that we have. There was a time, when we weren't seen as a people, as human beings, and then after we were, got the benefit of being able to be seen as human beings, we had to work to develop to see ourselves and to have others see us as not only human beings, but as men and women. And part of that process was fighting to make sure our defining characteristics are somewhat equal. You know, so if Caucasian has a capital C, if Mongoloid has a capital M, why doesn't Negro have a capital N? So it was another way for society to dehumanize us and to treat us as less than human beings. But that was just one thing that caught my attention as we were talking about the declarations and the rights of the Negro peoples of the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
And the struggle continues.
That's
Yeah.
You know, we fought, you know, these small things, you know, we have to appreciate, but we fought for that to be to be proper grammar, so to speak, so that in any time Negro is written or typed, it should be capitalized.
Yes. Yes. And they try to destroy that by creating the N word to make it like a bad thing.
Yeah.
So now if you're not careful, we don't even want to be called Negroes.
Yeah.
They made it so bad.
That's right.
Because when I first got into UNIA, I was like, well, why are they still calling us Negroes? Because it's just the brainwashing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the propaganda to
Yep.
make it like a bad thing. So, you know, if no one else has anything to add, we can look at question 9, which is probably going to be the last question, because we're going to go ahead and split it up into the reading. So we'll probably stop at this question since it's already 9, and then we'll spend a second hour on the reading. And so if no one has anything to add to the previous question,
I did, but if you want to speed it up, I'll just.
No speed. I was just acknowledging that it's 9 now, so we can make this the last question. But please go ahead and add your remark, comment, concern.
Yeah, I just often amazed at how Mr. Garvey was able to establish an African world empire in the citadel of white supremacy. He was able to take. I mean, I always say he didn't succeed because of luck. He succeeded because he had pluck and he had nerve and he had, you know, the audacity to demand for his race all over the world and to send representatives all over the world to protect and, you know, represent our rights. And I mean, boldly. I mean, he didn't probably have no problem with judge threatening him with prison time. You know, the hell with the judge.
Wow.
He was in his face. He was in, you know, he sent telegrams to all the world leaders, letting them know, you know, that there's a new force in town and that, you know, we got people and you know, industries and all kinds of things happening. And I mean, he really terrified the white power structure at that time that was weakened by World War I. And so all these African people who were, I mean, killing, you know, in World War I, killing the enemy, and showing that they had just as much military might and skill as white folks had, if not more. And now that Mr. Garvey was bringing this, you know, worldwide African force together, they were terrified. I mean, they really were petrified of what he may do and how he may take over industry in Africa and block them. Because whoever controls Africa's industry, they control the whole world economy. You know, so he can reverse the entire curse of our enslavement and you know, flip the script on who has the world power just by, you know, getting over there to get Liberia and starting with the rubber, because the whole world ran on rubber. So he was thinking so many years ahead of his time and our time, you know, that had any one little thing went differently, we would have had a much, much different reality. But a lot of things happened against him. A lot of forces came against him. And, you know, even though people say, you know, that he didn't succeed in some level of accomplishing everything he wanted, you know, when you given, like Tupac say, I was given this world, I didn't make it. You know, sometimes you are thrust into an intergenerational game of chess where you didn't create the board in the position where you in, but you take it from where you have it and you try to move the pieces along to a point where you have the advantage and where you're able to get within striking distance of checkmate. And Mr. Garvey somehow took a losing position and turned it into a winning position. And had we just followed the plan, man, we would have been much stronger today. But, you know, we started abandoning the plan and scattering, and, you know, they just would, you know, COINTELPRO and all these folks before that wanted to do was to discredit him and decentralize the movement. But, man, I just amazed at sometimes how much he was able to organize then, you know, was when he was much less, you know, information age. You know, we didn't have all these modern conveniences, and he was just able to put that all together. It was just mind blowing.
Sister Diane, you might be on mute.
Yeah, you are.
Look like we lost Sister Diane. Shoot, I have to call back in. I guess while she's calling back in, we can start on the last question. 1922, the UNIA was ready to try the league again. Assuming this is League of Nations. What was the request of the UNIA delegation?
And I'm not sure the exact wording, but the request of the petitioners to the League of Nations, who were seated as delegates at the League of Nations, even though they had to go through the Persian consul to have the petition read on the floor. But they were successfully seated. But anyway, the petition pretty much was calling for the UNIA to be the receivership for the German mandates that were lost or ceded during World War One. The whole World War was, or the European War, you should call it, the Great European War, was all about spoils of Africa and who can get what. And so, you know, Germany and Belgium were having beef over what part of Africa they wanted to regulate, and wound up, you know, Germany getting defeated and losing their control of their protectorates in Africa. So rather than giving those to another European to regulate, Mr. Garvey said, "Oh, you know, we, you know, we're snatched from our shores and, you know, given us certain liberties, you know, so why not allow us to occupy and, you know, self-govern our own land? Since you claim that the reason you came over there in the first place to Africa was to, you know, to civilize us and to teach us Western, you know, government and Western thinking and all this kind of stuff to make us more fit to rule. So we've been over here in America for 400 years. We've learned everything you got to teach. So now cede the land to us, you know. So, but the argument was well put together, and of course they rejected and denied it. But he put it in their face and made people start thinking that you know, we are worthy of everything that every other people on the planet are worthy of when it comes to self-determination. So yeah, he got the ball rolling for the United States of Africa.
Yeah, that same thing I was thinking was the land loss in on the continent through the Berlin Conference. That was the main thing. Or the other thing would have been, just as you said, representation. I'm pretty sure there was a fight for the UNIA to be considered the representatives of Africans in the diaspora, or I forgot how it was termed, but I know that was an issue with the League of Nations and as far as the population the UNIA was supposed to represent.
Hmm.
All right, we'll go to the answer. Ex-German colonies be turned over back to Black leadership. If the Black soldiers have been responsible for their capture, a petition was filed away for the 23 session. So they were supposed to discuss it in the 23 session. Interesting. UNIA delegation succeeded in being seated among the official delegates rather than in the galley where non-official delegates sat. Got in there. It's good. But that's the last question. Any questions, comments before we go to, well, I guess we're still waiting for, unless somebody else can read for us. We're waiting on Sister Diane.
I actually do have a question.
Yes.
So, I heard the term Westerners, or the West. I'm just trying to figure out exactly where's that origin coming from, especially like when people say like when they refer about like white people, they'll be like Westerners. Just curious if anybody knows kind of where the origin of that goes.
I don't remember where we were in the context of the discussion. Generally, Western would apply to Western Hemisphere. So North America, South America would be considered the West of the world. And then obviously, if we're getting more specific, United States, California would be the West of us. But in this context of global, West would usually apply to United States and North and South America, west of Europe.
Yeah, that came out of those
Okay,
studies.
thank you, brother.
Yeah, we're known as the Western world. Yeah. Mamina, you wanted to say something?
Oh no, no. It's good to be here.
Let me pull up the book. Africa. Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys, and thank you, brother Mariamatu, for continuing. I don't like this Android phone. It just decides to update in the middle of my session. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
We hear you now.
I mean, that is crazy. It just decided to do an update while I'm doing my thing. I don't know what's going on with it. Maybe I have to get an iPhone.
Yeah, that's lack of respect.
I know. That is crazy. Sorry, guys.
No problem.
Thank you.
We finished the question.
Yes, I saw that. So we're gonna go into chapter 6, which is propaganda. And if you guys want, I can start reading, and then if anyone wants to read, they'll be more than welcome to. We can share it. So anyway, hold on a second. Let me see, my phone is acting crazy. Crazy. Okay. Wow, it's time to trash this phone. I'm not even done paying for it. It's like crazy. Oh, so anyway, propaganda, chapter 6. And I think this is one of Garvey's quotes. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mamina, you got your line unmuted. Could you mute your line, please?
Okay. So propaganda says the great white man has succeeded in subduing the world by forcing everyone to think his way, from his God to his fireside, He has given to the world, from the Bible to his yellow newspaper sheet, a literature that establishes his right and sovereignty to the disadvantage of the rest of the human race. The white man's propaganda has made him the master of the world, and all those who have come in contact with it and accept it have become his slaves. The Universal Negro Improvement Association is now calling upon 400 million members of our race to discard the psychology and propaganda of all other peoples and to advance our own. The white man taught that the best of the world was intended for him, and now and we now teach that all the beauties of creation are the black man's, and he is heir to all that God has given to man. Marcus Garvey. Brother John? So Garvey sold the Negro to himself, S.A. Ames. Among Garvey's greatest feat was the thoroughness and success of his propaganda effort. He set out with self-conscious candor to oppose the propaganda of race pride and nationhood to the contrary ideas of white supremacy. African inferiority, white man's burden, and Caucasians' manifest destiny. Garvey almost single-handedly took on the official propaganda machines of all the European and North American colonialist powers, as well as the myriad publications, agencies, universities, and the like, which help in the dissemination of information insemal to the black man. We are not afraid of the word propaganda, he declared, for we use the term in the sense of disseminating our ideas among Negroes all over the world. We have nothing stealthily in this meaning. As far as Garvey was concerned, everything, education, religion, history, the news media, was enlisted by the dominant race in the furtherance of propaganda designed to perpetuate its continuance in power. The time had come, therefore, for the black man not only to make his own propaganda available, but to refuse to be guided by those who did not suffer and could not empathize with him. He said, can you hold for me a second? 1 second, okay? 1 second, don't go anywhere. V, tell your mom to check if something is burning. Tell your mom to check if something is burning. Tell her to check if something is burning. I can smell it. Sorry. Sorry, guys. I'm smelling like the kitchen on burn. Anyway, he said, available, but refused to be guided by those who did not suffer and could not empathize with him. He said it takes the slave to interpret the feelings of the slave. It takes the unfortunate man to interpret the spirit of the unfortunate brother, and it takes the suffering Negro to interpret the spirit of his comrade. Garvey's propaganda effort was most earnest in the years of his greatest glory in the United States. He considered the war-induced turmoil with its political unrest, its Russian Revolution, and its rumors of self-determination for all people ideal for strident propaganda of its type. By 1924, he taught that the world scene had stabilized to the point where the UNIA effort would have to shift more toward silent organization with a de-emphasis on loud propaganda. He informed his followers, remember the policy of the Universal Negro Improvement Association for 1924 and 1925, as far as its objective goes, is the same as it was in 1917, 1918, only that we're using more careful judgment. The thing that we could have said in 1914 up to 1920, we cannot say now, but we mean that just the same. This attitude was doubtless influenced too by the escalating attacks on his organizations, both from within and without. Yet there had been no essential change. The International Convention of 1924, for example, discussed, among other things, the tabooing of all alien propaganda inspired to destroy the ideals of the enslaving of the mind of the Negro. UNIA propaganda was disseminated in a variety of ways. In fact, practically every aspect of the organization had propaganda value. Its artistic publication were largely geared toward political indoctrination. The same could be said for religion as practice within the organization. Its business were designed to instill racial self-confidence and set an example. As Garvey said, you could not tell Black people, you had to show them. UNIA printed materials such as the Black Catechism serve as a similar purpose. The UNIA was even in the business of moving pictures. Some of its parades had been filmed for showing at Liberty Halls. Many of Garvey's speeches, as well as selection rendered by the Black Star Line brand, were available on phonograph records. At the 1929 International Convention, delegates considered the feasibility of a broadcasting station to further disseminate the message. Garvey's ambassador too, like all ambassadors, were charged with propaganda functions. His traveling commissioners toured much of the world, spreading his message and disseminating his literature. But the most effective of Garvey's propaganda devices were his newspapers. Having been trained as a printer and journalist, Garvey was well qualified for his role as newspaper propagandist. He founded several papers and journals during his life in several different countries. Around 1910 and 1911, he started Garvey's Watchman in Jamaica, La Nación in Port Limon, Costa Rica, and La Prensa in Colón, Panama. And he was apparently a co-publisher of the Bluefields Messenger in Costa Rica. All of these were short-lived. The weekly Negro World was published in Harlem from 1918 to 1933. Between 1922 and 1924, the Daily Negro Times appeared in Harlem. Back in Jamaica, after his expulsion from the United States, he published The Black Man from 1929 to 1931. This started as it proclaimed in large type on the front page as a daily newspaper devoted to the uplift of the Negro race and the good of humanity. It was later converted into a weekly. Its demise was followed by the appearance in the 1932 of the New Jamaica, a daily evening paper devoted to development of Jamaica. This lasted until 1933 and was followed almost immediately by the Black Man magazine, first published in Jamaica in December of 1933, and later in England up at and later in England up at least until 1939. To this list must be added the work of the African Times and Orient Review in London. The National Club, which he helped found in his early days in Jamaica, issued its own fortnightly, our own, and is mentor of this period, Dr. J. Robert Love, published the Jamaica Advocate. He also claimed to be connected with the Kingston Catholic opinion. The most important of Garvey's newspaper, and possibly his single greatest propaganda device, was the Negro World. The paper considered itself a propaganda medium published in the interest of the awakened Negro, and in its earliest period, it bore the banner, "Negro Get Ready," Negroes Get Ready, which appeared at the very top of the front page and even dwarfed the paper's title. The title was followed by the explanation, a newspaper devoted to the interests of the Negro race without the hope of profit as a business investment. Throughout almost the whole life of the paper, its front page was devoted to a Garvey polemic. A Philip Randolph, in his campaign against Garvey, derided this practice thus: "What sort of newspaper is the Negro World anyway, which devotes its front page, the news page of every modern, civilized, recognized newspaper in the newspaperdom to the vampering, imbecile puerilities and arrogant nonsense of a consummate ignoramus." What Randolph did not know was that Garvey's front page ideological statement served as gospel for Black people throughout the world. The reading of Garvey's Negro World message was a standard part of the UNIA's meetings wherever the organization existed. A Negro World columnist in 1927, for example, explained that it translated into scores of dialects 24 hours after arriving in Africa and carried by fleet runners into the hinterland up the Great Lakes of Southeast Africa. In Trinidad, the governor noted in 1920 that at meetings of the Trinidad Workmen's Association and elsewhere, verbatim quotations were utilized for the Negro World and other Garvey writings. Apart from Garvey himself, the Negro World was helped in its effort by a succession of some of the finest editors in Afro America. So one of the earliest was W.A. Domingo, who was for a while the paper's editorial writer. E. and Garvey parted company in 1919 over his socialistic ideas, according to Garvey, and his disagreement over Garvey's business schemes. During 1920 to 1921, the paper had a joint editor, Herbert H. Harrison, a lecturer, activist, and highly respected member of Harlem's intellectual community. From 1917 to 1919, he had published The Voice, an organ of his Liberty League, founded in 1917. William H. Farris, historian and graduate of Harvard and Yale, served 3 years as a literary editor and as an associate editor between 1919 and 1923. He claimed that the paper's bona fide circulation grew from 17,000 to 60,000 within his first year. John E. Bruce was, for some years, a contributing editor up to his death in 1924, as was Eric D. Walround, a successful literary figure in the Harlem Renaissance. But perhaps the most illustrious of the Negro World editor was T. Thomas Fortune, generally acknowledged dean of Afro-American journalists, who edited the paper from 1923 to his death in 1928. He dictated his last Negro World editorials from his sickbed during the last 3 weeks of his life. Deuce Muhammad Ali was also at the time associated with the paper. In the last year after Fortune, this high editorial stand in the last year after Fortune, this high editorial standard was maintained under Ucheswar G. Mudgall, and an Indian who came to Harlem via Trinidad. The Negro world was as far away as Australia. It was cited by colonial power as a factor in uprising and unrest in such diverse places as Dahomey, British Honduras, Kenya, Trinidad, and Cuba. These powers, therefore, had no illusion concerning the appeal of its message of racial self-reliance, its anti-colonial tone to oppress Black people. During its entire existence, therefore, the paper was engaged in a running battle with the British, French, United States, and other governments, all which assiduously sought to engineer its demise, or failing that, to restrict or prevent its circulation, especially in Africa, Central America, and the West Indies. The attitude of the colonist powers can be summed up in the words of a British official in Panama. The whole paper bristles with racial antagonism. Garvey and his followers, for their part, viciously protested these attempts, joking about them, always tried to circumvent them, and in Garvey's case, was in Garvey's case wax poetic about them. We will keep from them, the Negro world, that no news they'll have of a flag unfurled. Should they smuggle copies in and we fail, we will send the sly agent all to jail. This is the white man's plan across the sea. It isn't this wily and vicious as can be. So in more prosaic fashion, in 1920 the 1920 Declaration of Rights protested the suppression of Black paper all over the world, while a 1928 Garvey petition to the League of Nations specifically protested the banning of the Negro world in some areas and the uh, imposition of penalties, including life imprisonment and even death for possessing it. Garveyite S.A. Ames observed locally, I mean, iconically and correctly, it's a read weekly by British and French foreign officers. The British authorities were kept especially busy in their war against the paper. In 1923, the British acting governor of Nyasaland explained that on the grounds that this paper was poisonous and mischievous to a degree which only those who had dealings with the crude African native can properly appreciate, it was placed in March last year on the list of prohibited papers in Nyasaland. In 1923, copies were also being confiscated in northern Rhodesia. Around the same time, the acting governor of Sierra Leone was reporting that the paper, though not absolutely prohibited, had been strictly controlled, and only a few copies had been allowed to circulate. In the other British colonies in West Africa, the Gold Coast, Nigeria, Gambia, it was banned outright by the time. It was still prohibited in those areas into the 1930s. Those darn British colonies. The British overload were less successful in suppressing the local African press that supported Garvey's program. The Gold Coast leader in the article in 1928 entitled Censorship of the Negro World, a Sign of Weakness, praised the paper, supported its principles of Pan-African cooperation, and actually quoted from the forbidden publication. How its editor, J.E. Casey Hayford, was able to obtain the paper is illustrated by a letter of his to J.E. Bruce. He wrote, "I do not get the Negro world regularly. When I see it, it is much too late, and I like to keep abreast of what's going on. Can you kindly make sure and send me a copy each week, well wrapped up to my secondee address?" In South Africa, though the paper was not prohibited outright, a local agent in Kimberley reported that when he pick up his paper at the post office, he ran into gauntlet of kicks, punches, sneers, insults, and impertinent questions. In the West Indies too, heavy-handed every hand of British reaction fell upon the paper. Indeed, here the paper was attacked practically from its inception. As early as February 1919, when UNIA agents were discovered soliciting membership and selling the paper in Trinidad, it was banned. In June 1919, the acting governor of Trinidad confided to the counterpart in the British Guyana that in so doing, the action taken by the government is not strictly covered by the law. It was not until 1920 that the legal niceties attending its prohibition was attended to. Attempts to have the ban lifted during the following year was unsuccessful. In British Honduras, the paper was withheld from distribution from early 1919 under emergency regulations. When in 1920, the governor received permission to pass permanent legislation against it, he decided that maybe he did not want to follow this course of action after all, since he was afraid of the racial feeling that still existed after the rioting staged by the Black people in July 1919. Garveyism was considered to be a factor of these disturbances. British Guyana followed the same pattern. Here too, the paper was first banned early in 1919, and only afterwards was the question of legislation to legitimize the fate accompli considered. On June 20, 1919, the colony's executive committee unanimously agreed to recommend prohibition of the Afro-American publication Crusader, Monitor, Recorder, and Negro World. The Negro World was singled out as being of grossly offensive character. When the bill was ready to be introduced before the colony's court of policy, there was so much protest from the Black population that the governor considered it necessary to telegraph for a warship to stand by. He then deferred to public sentiment to the extent of introducing the bill banning foreign objectionable publication, but curtailing the operation after its second reading. The idea was that in case of emergency, the last stages of the bill could be rushed through it and could be law in a very short time. Workers celebrated their defeat of the government's intentions, but the paper seemed to have been banned later for a petition requesting the lifting of the embargo was presented not long after to the British appointed Wood Commission, which was investigating conditions in the area. Accordingly, the government in 1922 seriously considered acceding to its request but explained in a dispatch to Winston Churchill, then Secretary of State at the Colonial Office, that his executive committee was totally against the idea, and it would anyway be unwise while the ban continued in Trinidad. The Trinidad government, in response to an inquiry from Churchill, reiterated its refusal to discontinue its embargo. Despite the fact that British Guyana governor thought the newspaper no less objectionable than Radical White magazine, which were admitted, and was also convinced that the paper's tone had by 1922 grown appreciably less strident than 1919. The paper was also promptly suppressed in 1920 in Bermuda and Grenada. In the same year, such a course was considered to stem its growing stem its growing circulation. Even in non-British territories bordering the Caribbean, British authorities did what they could to prevent the paper's circulation. The British consul in Port Lamont, Costa Rica, took an active part in having the local authorities confiscate the paper in 1919. They also confiscate the charter and constitution sent by the UNIA parent body in New York to local divisions. As late as 1926, the British consul in Colon, Panama, was bemoaning the possible effects of anti-British propaganda being spread among the British West Indies there through the Negro world. Where the British did legally ban the paper, this was usually through passage of a seditious publication ordinance. The Grenada West Indians mouthpiece of nationalist politician T.A. Marichaud attacked one such proposed measure in 1920 as an outrage, an incitement to sedition, and anarchy, to revolt, and the determining factor of our struggle for the representative government. Grenadians' protests included a 600-strong meeting at St. David's. In the late 1920s, the paper was banned for a while in Cuba, and in mid-1920s in Liberia. It fared no better in French colonies, for it was banned in all of them from at least as early as 1922, though it appears to have been available in the Ivory Coast in 1932. For much of the paper's life, of course, sections were printed in French and Spanish in addition to English. Against this onslaught on his major propaganda organ, Garvey replied with a well-organized smuggling network, which, at least in the beginning, proved very effective in circumventing authorities though at great cost to the organization. The most important link in the clandestine Negro World distribution network was provided by Black seamen, but one West Indian worker at the Panama Canal remember being first introduced to the paper in 1918 by Japanese soldiers who use it to deposit copies of their way through the copies on their way through the canal. The successor of these smuggling efforts were attested to by the colonial authorities themselves. The governor of British Honduras, for example, confessed that despite the embargo on it from early 1919, I had every reason to believe that the paper was being smuggled into the colony through Mexico and Guatemala, uh, in larger number than before the ban was placed on it. The governor of Trinidad in 1920 reported a large cache of the paper through the UNIA leaflet, including a pamphlet written by Garvey especially to the people of Trinidad. Hidden in between the cargo of a ship from New York, C.L.R. James has said that despite the ban, he managed to buy a copy every Saturday morning in Port of Spain. The police in Trinidad and doubtless elsewhere were kept busy looking for the paper. The houses were searched by detectives. My goodness. The United States government, although it never actually banned the Negro world, nonetheless kept it under close surveillance from the beginning. In addition, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer in 1919 gave the Negro world pride of place in the Department of Justice, reported on radicalism and sedition amongst the Negroes as reflected in their publication. The Negro World was the first of several Afro-American publications dealt with in the report. By July 1919, official of the Post Office Department was conferring amongst themselves and seeking the advice of their solicitor as to whether the paper was objectionable enough to be proceeded against. They were particularly alarmed at pro-Bolsheviks and race first articles, both of which were apparently considered equally dangerous. Apart from the department's own observation, the occasional public spirited American citizens sought to draw their attention to the radical effects of the paper. One such as an apparently white resident of Tower Hill, Virginia, sent the department copies of the Negro World and Chicago Defender to show what kind of matter was benefiting from the United States mails. He drew the attention of the official to the fact that Negroes now would not work for white folks, presumably due to the influence of these papers. Many communications of this nature emanated from the American consular agent abroad, who generally shared the feeling of their host government that the United States mail should not be used for what they considered the subversion of friendly friendly governments. In May 1919, the American consul in Georgetown, British Guiana, reported that the local inspector of police had called on him. This goodly British official explained that his government wanted to prevent the receipt of distribution of four publications: the Negro World, Crusader, Monitor, published in Omaha, Nebraska, and the Christian Recorder, official organ of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, apparently the combination of the Black American, of Black and American was enough to cause fight among British colonial officialdom. The British official explained in the word of the consul that uh, owing to the fact that the Black uh, population is several times that of the white, and includes some prominent positions such as officials, lawyers, doctors, ministers. They are uncertain as to the advisability of taking the necessary step here to prevent their circulation. They therefore preferred for the United States to stop them at source. It is not by banning them outright, uh, then by uh, then by denying them the use of the mail. So the council reported that of the four, only the Negro World and Crusader were dangerous. 2 years later, the post office solicitor got around to declaring that the publication could not be subject to a blanket denial of mailing privileges. Each issue would have to be separately ruled upon. The British authorities in London itself in 1919 document unrest among the Negroes, presumed to inform Uncle Sam that there were a radical Black organization in the United States, the UNIA and the Negro World, were mentioned in the British Defender, were careful to point out it is certain that the various Negro organizations in the United States will not leave the British colonies alone. In the case of Trinidad, the American consul Henry D. Baker took the initiative in suggesting that the paper be stopped at the source. He explained that although the local postal authorities burned every copy they could find of this publication, which is obviously intended as propaganda to cause race trouble and general anarchy, nonetheless, it is believed that many copies escaped destruction and are circulated in the surreptitious way throughout the colony. He enclosed several wrappers in which papers had been mailed by Garvey to persons in Trinidad to show how the United States mails are being used for the purpose of forwarding to friendly country papers directly inciting Negro population to act of murders and anarchy. Man, these people sick. From Costa Rica, the post office department founded itself being prodded into action by the anti-Negro World, a coalition of the United Fruit Company, the British Council, and the Costa Rican authorities in September 1919. The Washington Council for the United Fruit Company wrote the Secretary of the State and enclosed sample copies of the Negro World. Garvey's earliest sojourn in Costa Rica had evidently not been uneventful, for the company remembered it clearly. The latter explained that Garvey left Lemon in 1912 and that he is a typical noisy Jamaican, and if allowed to go on as he has been doing, this is a possibility of there is a possibility of his attempting to repeat the French experience in Haiti. He reported too that the governor of Le Mans, with the agreement of the British Council, was planning to deport all those present at the next UNIA meeting. The UNIA Fruit Company Council suggests finally that the Department of Justice assign its Secret Service to the case since the UNIA was inciting a revolution and thereby violating neutrality of countries at peace with the United States. Similar correspondence were received from Costa Rican officials who, after banning the Negro World, requested the New York Post Office not to allow it to be mailed to Costa Rica. The Negro World propaganda spreading over the Caribbean area did not bypass United States colonies. Casper Holstein, a prominent figure in the United States based Virgin Islands nationalist movement, was a regular contributor to the Negro World, which he found a cooperative medium. His brother-in-law, D. Hamilton Jackson, was president of St. Croix Labor Union. After a short spell in the United States, Jackson was by 1923 back in St. Croix agitating, amongst other things, for universal suffrage. Official became alarmed at the propaganda value of articles appearing in the Negro World, praising Jackson's effort. One judge ventured the opinion that all the poisonous articles published in the Negro World by Holstein are inspired by Jackson. The course of events in the United States suggests that authorities apparently preferred to move against Garvey himself rather than possibly creating an equally great furor by moving merely against the paper. Indeed, a move against the paper may have been very unpopular with the same establishment Black leader who were anxious to see the government move against Garvey himself, since many of them were involved in publications of their own and were sensitive to any precedents establishing press censorship. This had been the lesson of Attorney General Palmer 1919 report against the African American press. Some of those who later became Garvey's bitterest enemies, such as A. Philip Randolph and Chandler Owen of the Messenger and Cyril Briggs of the Crusader, was censored along with Garvey and the Negro World in that report. And The Crisis, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, though disclaiming any brief for the Negro World and other publications, still came out in defense of their still came out in defense of their 1919 report against the Afro-American press. Some of those who later became Garvey's bitterest enemies, such as A. Philip Randolph and Chandler Owen of the Messenger and Cyril Briggs of the Crusader, were censored along with Garvey and the Negro World in the report, and The Crisis, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, through disclaiming any brief for the Negro World and other publication, still came out in defense of their right to speak. Similarly, in 1920, the Graham Sedition Bill was killed in Congress with the support of the conservative Black New York Age and NAACP. This bill had sought to muzzle and render non-mailable radical Black publication. a move against Garvey's himself involved no such entanglement for the United States government, since the most important recognized leader outside of the UNIA were almost totally arrayed against him.
Sister Diane, it's 4 minutes after 10.
Okay.
I think it's still five. I looked at the book, it's 5 pages left in this chapter.
Okay.
I don't want to try to finish tonight.
Okay.
I think this puts us,
Okay.
yeah, we'll be at page 100 when we come back.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Awesome. Awesome. Okay.
Excellent job with the reading.
Propaganda. So we're seeing all the stuff that that they just try to keep a good man down. But anyway, guys, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed the meeting as always, enjoyed all your inputs and participation. And with no further ado, I guess we can go ahead and close out until next time. And Brother John, if you don't mind, please, you can do the honors. And if Brother
Yeah, I think Brother
Mario
John,
wants.
had something that he was going to share.
Oh, yes,
Wait a
I'm so
minute,
sorry.
if it's not,
Yes, please.
uh,
Yes, yes, absolutely. Go ahead, please. The floor is yours.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to do the Universal Ethiopian anthem, which is normally how we close anyway. But particularly today, I wanted to, be talking about the red, black, and green flag, and I was looking at a friend of mine that did a missive of sorts on the 4 girls who got killed. Actually, 2 boys got killed the same day, and the tragic incident happened in our history many years ago. In fact, Dr. Julius Garvey wrote a hell of a piece about that. But anyway, in the process of thinking about the 4 little girls, I reminded of how the Universal Ethiopian anthem was written partly inspired by a similar incident. Because when it was being written, there was a woman who was she was excuse me for a second, I'm parking. There was a woman who was a domestic worker, young lady, barely out of her teens, and she was working for a white yuppie couple in Jersey. And anyway, while the wife was away one day, the husband had his way with her, wound up beating her up and actually killed her. And when the wife came home, found out about it, she and he decided to dump her body in the river and, just or in the ocean or wherever, and just did away with it. And a few days later, the body got caught up in the the rudder of a ship. And so they discovered it, and everybody was outraged by this brutal, murder and rape, until they found out it was white folks who did it. And then all of a sudden they tried to hush it up. So anyway, it was big story and a scandal behind it. But during the time, the Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford had been working on the Universal Ethiopian anthem, and he had came up with some of the lines to the anthem, and he had 3 of the stanzas ready, and then there was a 4th stanza that he put together after seeing this woman's mangled body, brought up to the to the grass, outside of the ship, and everybody was crying and everything was going on. So he put a line in there that I wanted to sing along with the rest of the anthem, just to kind of give you all a taste of where his head was at the time, so you know how powerful this piece is that we have. So anyway, without further ado, if you don't mind, I was going to sing. I was going to skip over the refrain just to make it a little quicker and just do the stanzas. Ethiopia, the land of our fathers, the land where the gods love to be. The storm clouds and night suddenly gather, our armies come rushing to thee. We must in the fight be victorious, when swords are thrust outward to gleam. For us will the victory be glorious, when led by the red, black, and green. Ethiopia, the tyrants are fallen, who smote thee upon thy knees. Thy children are lustily calling from over the distant sea. Jehovah, the great one, has heard us, has noted our sighs and our tears. With the spirit of love, he has stirred us to be one through the coming years. O Jehovah, the God of the ages, grant unto our sons that lead the wisdom thy gave to thy sages when Israel was sore in need. Thy voice through the dim past is spoken. Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hand. By thee shall all fetters be broken, and heaven bless thy dear motherland. The final part. Oh, her red blood they spilled on the meadow shall always be dear to me. Her black form that laid on the meadow cried out, Africa must be free. The red and the black tearful giving, the green grass did tenderly scream, and thy rain fell bright teardrops from heaven on the red and the black and the green. So advance, advance to victory, let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe, advance to meet the foe, with the might of the red, the black, and the green. With the might of the red, the black, and the green.
Thank you, Brother Mariam. Excellent.
Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you. Wow. Mm. Brother John, if you do the honors and finish closing us out. Thank you so much, Brother Mariama. That was beautiful. Thank you for adding that, sharing that piece. That was quite a story. Wow. Man.
Got the third verse. Okay. If everyone would please come off mute, put your black fists in the air, and repeat after me as we close out. And Sister Diane, excellent job. Another great Tuesday study session. Close out with the motto: One God,
One God,
one aim,
one aim,
One name,
one destiny.
one
one
destiny.
destiny.
And we'll also say our slogan: Africa
Africa
Africa,
for the Africans,
for the
for the
Africans,
Africans,
those at home,
those at
Those at
home
home,
and those abroad.
and
and
those
those
abroad.
Grace first, family. Go in peace.
Praise first. Peace and love, everyone. One love. See you next time.